going to turn on my camera because that's usually what I do. Um, so yeah, as Jason mentioned, so I've been involved in actually when I back in like 2 3 years ago. I got introduced to all the Azure meetups and being as a presenter in a few occasions, and that was thanks to Jason. So he's one of the guys that helped boost my career, and now. So as he was mentioning, I joined Microsoft back to 2018, so a couple of years ago. I've been in a couple of teams. Now I joined the ARM deployments team. So I am a senior software engineer. So let me go and start my presentation, and hopefully you guys can see. Okay. So my name is Jorge Cotillo. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft Azure in the ARM deployments team. So ARM, as you may know, is a big service, and one of those services is the deployments piece of the service. So this is basically all the ARM templates that you're going to be deploying. So those go through a deployment engine. So now the team that I'm working in is basically in charge of that specific slice of the service. So today we're going to just be talking about what is the infra code using ARM templates, of course, using deployment scripts, which is we're going to be talking about what deployment script means, and we're going to be talking about the template specs. So for those that know Azure Blueprints, this is going to be really similar to you. So let me go and check the agenda. So for today, just a brief introduction on what an ARM template is, right? So there have been other talks that talks about what an ARM template is and what you can do and all the different tricks and tips that you can do in an ARM template. But today we're going to just give a basic idea on what that is. And then we're going to look into the infra code usually means a declarative approach. We're going to see what declarative means. We're going to see deployment scripts, right? So what it is. So what is used for and some of the consideration that we can have. We're going to see a PowerShell demo. I won't be running those scripts, but just rest assured that those work. I'm going to be sharing my GitHub repo as well. So all the demos are over there. So yes, for time's sake, I won't be running those demos, but I'm going to be showing you what are the outputs of some of those. So PowerShell, Bash demo, deployment scripts considerations, what you need to consider, what you need to account for when you want to meet compliance regulations. So Azure policy, right? So that's one of the compliance regulations. Then we're going to look just getting into template specs. We're going to look into what a monolithic versus a modularized template means. Then we're going to look into how you can share and modularize your templates by using template specs. And then some Q&A if the time allows. Hopefully, we're going to have some time for Q&A in case there are any questions. So let's dive into what an ARM template is, right? So an ARM template is just a resource group and a collection of resources, right? So a resource group is just a logical grouping of your different services. So please, if you're working with Azure and you're creating different resource groups, try to just group a logical grouping the resources that are related, right? So if you have networking resources, just put those in a resource group. The reason is because you can go and manage the access on those resources, right? So now you have an isolated building block that contains related resources, and then you can give, for example, access to your networking team to just manage the firewall, the UDR, the NSGs, and the different networking services that Azure offers. So I'm using the example of AKS here because that's a complex deployment, right? So if we deploy just let's say a VNet by itself, it doesn't mean much, right? So what you need is you need an environment, right? So you need an AKS cluster, you need a connection from Kubernetes RBAC to your Azure AD, you need UDRs, NSGs, you need to connect to key vault, so key rotation, a bunch of stuff, right? So that's what an environment means, right? So, and how you can get to that environment is basically using the building blocks or the ARM templates, right? So that's the relationship, right? So as I said, so I won't be diving deep into what you can do with an ARM template. I assume there have been other talks about that, but if you have any questions about that, just feel free to reach out. So then let's move into what you can do to actually deploy the environment, right? So to deploy the environment, like all those building blocks, you can use an ARM template, you can use Azure CLI, you can use Azure PowerShell, you can use Terraform, right? So all those are acceptable approaches, right? So it's going to depend on which tool you're going to be using, depends on your team, right? So if your team knows Terraform, then let's go with Terraform. If your team knows PowerShell, maybe you can use PowerShell, right? So we know that authoring some of the ARM templates are not that simple, but we are working towards simplifying that experience. But something that you have to be aware of are the pros and the cons, right? So if we have ARM templates, CLI, PowerShell, and Terraform, let's see some of these 4 items that I usually account when I'm making a decision. So first is you have to recognize which tool is going to get the resource providers or the RPs or the services basically for free, right? So if we're working in an ARM template, because every single service goes through ARM, then usually ARM templates are going to get those services by default. CLI, PowerShell, and Terraform, they won't be getting those for free. So if you don't know about how the CLI and PowerShell works, basically they use the SDKs, right? So for PowerShell is the .NET SDK, the Azure SDK, and for CLI is the Azure Python SDK. So how the SDK gets generated is actually an automatic process, right? So if you don't know about the REST APIs and all the different specs that every single service has, we have basically a repo and it's open source, and I'm going to be sharing the link at the end. But that's basically the contract of every single operation for every single resource in Azure. So what that means is the Swagger spec is going to get translated into an SDK for Python, an SDK for .NET, an SDK for Go, anything, right? So we have a bunch of SDKs. So that's an automatic process. But to get to the CLI and to get to the PowerShell commands, you have to actually code those commands. So you have like maybe 90% of the work done by just using the SDK, but you still need to do some work to just get those new services to be exposed through CLI or PowerShell. In Terraform, if you guys know about Terraform, so basically you need to code the provider. Then another approach is single API calls, right? So which one is going to make one single API call to just go and provision your environment? So usually an ARM template is one single call, and then you just delegate to the deployment engine to schedule the different resources and how orchestrate basically the deployment of the different resources. In CLI, PowerShell, and Terraform, usually no, right? So you need to go and make different API calls to just be able to provision an environment. If you know about the limitations, there are some, well, not limitation, but there are some, there is a quota limit on how many API calls you can make per subscription, per tenant. For the put operations, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 6,000 calls or something. So it's a high number. It's unlikely that you're going to get that that restriction, so that you're going to be making that many API calls, but you never know, right? So if you code something really wrong, then you might reach out the quota limit, and then you're blocking basically anyone that wants to deploy anything into Azure. So something just to consider. The learning curve, yes. So ARM templates, we know is from medium to high. Especially if you're deploying a really complex environment, is going to be a high bar to just go and learn how to author an ARM template. Even though we have the VS Code extensions, we have a bunch of additional tools that can simplify the authoring, and I'm actually working on those. It still need some additional knowledge on how to author an ARM template. For the CLI, simple. PowerShell is simple. So granted that you know in CLI, you know some of Bash, and then for PowerShell, you know PowerShell. And for Terraform, I put medium because usually it's almost the same, right? So it's not really easy to just go and deploy a complex environment in Terraform. Multi-cloud. So this time I'm going to start from Terraform. I have nothing against Terraform. I like them, but Terraform is not multi-cloud. So please, I heard multiple times people saying, I use Terraform because it's a multi-cloud. No, right? So the engine is agnostic of a cloud. It's cloud agnostic, but it's not a multi-cloud solution, right? So if you deploy something in Azure, if you create a Terraform file or Terraform template, that one you cannot go and switch flag and say now deploy to AWS. That won't work, right? So therefore, it's not a multi-cloud solution, right? It's cloud agnostic, which is totally different. For PowerShell, CLI, of course, no. For ARM templates, I'm giving some additional credit here, sort of. The reason is because we have Azure Arc, right? So you can go and deploy hybrid compute, for example, which is a resource type service through an ARM template, right? So now you can go and deploy to different clouds using one single template. So that's going close to being a multi-cloud. So let's go and check now that we discussed a little bit about like the different options. So now let's go and check what infras code and declarative means, right? So that's basically all the infras code, right? So it needs to be declarative. So you have to declare a state of a resource, right? So if you deploy or let's say you create an ARM template that has a VM and that VM has 5 disks, so that's what the end result is going to be, right? One VM with 5 disks. If that doesn't work, I'm going to give you guys my email at the end because that's an issue and you guys should be contacting us. Of course, it's not going to be directly me, but customer service is going to get involved if something like that nature happens, right? But the result is, or the idea is that you have to declare the state of a resource. So what you see is what you get, right? So it's like similar to HTML, right? So in HTML, you have a bunch of text boxes that you know how many are going to be, you know that are going to be there, but you have no idea how they are going to look like or how the user is going to interact, right? So that's basically what declarative means. So is declarative actually sufficient to provision an environment? So let's go and take a look at the AKS example again, right? So if I want to declare this, usually I'm going to start having like maybe a really long ARM template that is going to start getting really complex to maintain. So maybe I need to focus on something different. And that something different is basically functions, right? So that's why ARM templates, we expose different functions. But now we're just losing the declarative approach, right? So declarative, if you are just talking about like a copy loop, that should not exist because you need to go and copy the same resource multiple times. And that sometimes is not good for end users. So that's why we introduce different functions. But now we are realizing that being fully declarative is not sufficient to provision an environment, to configure the environment. So enter deployment scripts, right? So we realize that because it's not sufficient to be declarative, then we need some functions, then we need more tools to just go and maybe configure my RBAC, maybe configure my my key vault keys and the key rotation and a bunch of that those stuff. So then we said, okay, why don't we go into putting that as a native construct in the platform, right? So That's how deployment script was born. So we realized that the declarative approach is not sufficient to provision an environment, to fully configure an environment. So a couple of examples here is, well, the deployment script is just a resource deployment that is going to just finalize the environment configuration. So you can go and think about, like, for example, accessing Azure AD, the Graph API. You can create keys in Key Vault. You can create users. You can associate Kubernetes RBAC to Azure AD RBAC, right? So there are items or let's say some operations at the control and data plane layer that you cannot do through an ARM template. And before you were forced to just use maybe a PowerShell script, or you were forced to use a Bash script to just go and account for those missing operations. Usually those operations are post operations. All the put operations are, most of them are going to be included in an ARM template. It depends. If one is going to be included, is because the contract has been specified in Swagger, and then you allow that operation to happen. There are some RPs, some services that they don't allow some put operation through an ARM template. So that's basically depending on the different service team. But that's what deployment script is going to allow us, right? So now we can go and configure the environment, control, and data plane operations in Azure, right? So now you don't need to go and expose an additional, create an additional service principal, and then associate that into your Azure DevOps pipeline. So another user can go and access Azure and start running some operations. So now by using an ARM template, you can accomplish the same. So let's see how it works, right? So how deployment scripts are going to work, right? So if you see this image, so we have a container instance, ACI, and we have a storage account. So what deployment script is going to do is going to create two resources, two supporting resources, ACI and the storage account. So I put some of the settings for the storage account. Yes, locally redundant, standard SKU, and of course, HTTPS enabled. And the ACI is going to, the storage account is going to get mounted in ACI. And the reason is because ACI is the container running your script, and the storage account is, let's say, the container that is going to be hosting your scripts, right? So ACI runs, the storage account hosts the information. So now it's up to you to how many files you want to share, how many files you want to download. So basically, you are in full control. So I'm adding here in customer subscription, right? So these two resources are inside the customer subscription. We've been asked multiple times about why Microsoft doesn't create these two resources in a Microsoft tenant, such that those resources are not created in the customer's subscription. That's something that we are analyzing, right? So it's going to be clean, of course, because now it's not polluting your resource groups, it's not polluting your resources. So now there is nothing that gets created, but there is going to be a cost associated that we need to go and analyze. So even though it sounds like a simple request to just go and say, hey, Microsoft, go and you do this on my behalf. I don't want to just host any of these services. So even though it's a simple ask, it's a complex engineering task, right? So that there are different considerations that we have to account for us to just provide that type of approach. So let's see now what are going to be the permissions, right? So now, what are the permissions that you need to have in order to create those supporting resources, right? So because I'm saying that deployment script is going to create two resources. Now, someone needs to have that type of permission or the specific permission to be able to create those resources. So in deployment scripts, we expose user managed identity. So now you can go and control that specific user managed identity is going to have specific permissions to go and execute whatever your script is going to execute, plus the creation of a container group and the creation of an storage account. All right, so that's how we can manage that specific level of permission. So that's in a nutshell what a deployment script is, right? So just to recap really quick, so we realized that being fully declarative is not sufficient. We saw different customers doing different clever stuff to just get to that last mile of configuration of the environment configuration, but just maybe using a VM, and I saw that multiple times. So people were creating a VM with a custom extension so they can run specific scripts inside a VM, and then at the end of the deployment, they just kill that VM. So, or some other teams, and actually in the previous team that I was part of in the Azure VDC, or the virtual data center, we created a custom engine that can run PowerShell and Bash scripts, right? So inside a container, a bunch of stuff, but you see, like there are multiple ways to accomplish this common ask. So that's why we said, why not we just go and create a service so every single customer can use, instead of like doing something on their own. So that's how a deployment script was born. So let's look into a few demos. So I'm going to check the PowerShell demos first. And the idea is you create a script in your local computer. You can copy that script in your ARM template, and it should work the same, right? So there are some considerations that we're going to get into that, but the process and the execution of the script should work the same. So we're going to analyze two scripts in PowerShell. As I said at the beginning, I won't be running those because there is not much benefit on you guys seeing running a script. But I'm going to show you what the end result is, right? So I'm going to show you how you can go and create an inline script with no outputs, and then an inline script with outputs. So let's go and take a look into those first. So here I have my simple. Oh, wait, I think I'm not showing that. So let me share again, because I need to share my whole screen. The thing is this one. Okay, so now you guys should see. So I have a simple just inline script, just a PowerShell script, really dummy script that is just receiving two arguments, right? So if I'm receiving two arguments and I'm writing those two arguments, then of course, if I run those locally, I should be able to see a result, right? So I have my inline script, which is this one right here, and I'm just passing my first argument, my second argument, and then I get this information. So if I go into my deployment script, then, so here's the resource. This is an ARM template. Again, I'm not going to be going into details here. But the same script that I have right here, I just pasted that over here. Right, so you can just go and copy, paste, and then pass some arguments. So in this case, the way that I'm passing the arguments, just to show that again, through my command line, right? So I'm just doing this, I'm passing foo and bar. So now if you're passing the arguments via a template, you can just go and inline them, right? So just by saying arguments, you can go and pass expressions. So now we are in an ARM template, right? So all the different goodies that you have in an ARM template, now you can use them here, right? So because this is a resource, now I can sequence the deployment, right? So I can go and see, or I can go and set that this deployment script is going to run after a VM creation, or it's going to run after a key vault creation. So I can go and create keys and then do a key rotation, right? So now I can go and do that stuff. I can go and get information from a different resource, right? So I can go and receive, I can use any function, for example, a reference function, to just go and get the resource ID or a specific property from a already deployed resource, right? So it's an ARM template. So now whatever you want to do with the ARM template, or whatever you done in the past with an ARM template, now you can do the same in deployment scripts. It's just another resource. There are a few properties. I'm going to be explaining about those later, but just take into consideration that I have my force update tag. I have what is my version of PowerShell. What is the timeout? So when I want this script to just time out, and then what are my arguments and my script content. Then I have cleanup preference, and then this is a retention interval, how long is going to get retained that information. So there are some properties that I'm not showing here, but again, I'm showing the documentation at the end that explains in detail every single property and what we use those properties for. So just take a look into that. I'm trying to cover as much as I can because I know that just reading a documentation sometimes is not that fun. So that's why I'm trying to just cover some of the information that you guys might want to consider. So if I just go into Azure, I have this one, right? So this is my PowerShell with no outputs. That's the one that I run right here, right? So a script with no outputs, a script with no outputs. So this is the one. So if I check the outputs, of course, what I'm going to see, nothing, which is in line to what I was expecting. But we can just go and take a look into the template so you guys can check that I'm not lying to you, that this is the same template that I showed to you, right? So it has the user managed identity, of course, the script content. It was multi-line in VS Code because the extension is allowing that, but JSON by default doesn't allow that. So that's why when you export the template, when you see the template, you are not going to see those break lines. Instead, you're going to see these return next line characters. But this is the same, right? So I have my parameters, I have my first, my last, my right host. So it's the same, right? So I run this, and then what this actually created, this is going to create my resource, which is deployment script, or in this case is PowerShell with no outputs here. So if I look into this one, then I'm going to see what my script actually did, right? So executing a script, and then it's saying I'm executing this script, and then it's executing or it's passing foo and bar. So, but wait a minute. So this executing a script is not part of my outputs, right? So the script that I created. So if I show you guys again, I have nothing about debugging information. So what's happening, right? So who is adding that information? Well, it turns out the deployment script has something called Bootstrap, or let's say a system script that is going to orchestrate your script, right? So it's the one that is going to be in charge of logging you in to Azure, is going to go and download any file if you instruct deployment scripts to download a supporting file. Is going to grab your content, right? So this is just an inline content, right? So showing again the script. So this is just an inline content. And of course, I cannot pass this inline content to my ACI. I need to just go and grab this content, create a file, and then upload that into the storage account that is mounted into ACI, right? So that's how we can go and pass information and read information from Azure, right? So once I was asked why we are creating a storage account and why we're creating an ACI when ACI already contains some storage. So the answer is simple, right? So the answer is ACI has some limited space, but the main reason is if we push, let's say, the script content into an ACI instance, there is no way for Azure to just go into ACI and read the file system, right? So we need something a shared location so that ACI can access the files and Azure can access the files, right? So we need to access the files because we're going to, as we are going to see in the next demo, we need to go and access outputs, right? So when your script outputs something, how Azure is going to get that information, right? So the only way is to just have a shared service in this case that we can go and retrieve information, and that's the storage account. So here's the ACI, right? So as you can see, it's a cryptic name, it's a hash name, a bunch of stuff, and then AZ scripts at the end. And then here we can see the container, right? So the container, so in this case, I'm just showing the CLI, but it's the same for PowerShell. So it's going to tell you about the image, what is the state of the container, and then it's going to show you some log information. Right, so this is now inside the container. And then if we look into the storage account really quick, then the storage account also has some cryptic name. That's basically to just prevent any name collisions, right? So if you run one deployment script and then you run another one, we don't want to just conflict with the names, right? So that's why we create a hash of a specific information. So this is the storage account. Here's the file share that I mentioned. So now in this case, I have two file shares because I run this multiple times. Then I can just get into one of them, and then I'm going to see what is my input and what is my output, right? So if you take a look into the input, this deployment script.sh or deployment script.ps1 for PowerShell, that's the system or the bootstrap script that I mentioned before, right? So that's the one in charge of downloading the files, the one in logging you in, the one in charge of checking if there was a script failure, right? So it's the orchestration, it's the brain behind your deployment. So if this is already in the user's storage account, so you can go and download this and then make modifications. And if you see something that needs to get modified, please feel free to just reach out. There might be maybe better ways to do the orchestration. And then what is in the user script is basically the inline content, right? So we need to go and grab the inline content from the template and push that into the storage account, and then we use a specific naming convention. So this is just the user script. So that's for just a simple PowerShell without any outputs. So if we want to see a PowerShell with outputs, so let's go and take a look into the next example. So the next example is going to be a little bit more complex. Let's say that now I have a module, right? So I have my PSM1 in PowerShell, and this module is just running some function, and then the function is just accepting some arguments or parameters, and then is going to just assume that it's going to manipulate the data, and then it's going to output an object, right? So in this case, it's just going to output a hash table. So so if we have this information now, how can I just go and import this module in my deployment script so I can execute this super awesome function? So, well, that we can go and take a look now into the next demo, which is the inline script with outputs. So what this is going to do is, again, just on a script content. And then in the script content, I can go and say, just import the module. This is the name of my module, so I better use the same name. So I don't think the deployment script is going to change the name. So if I'm just uploading one file, deployment script should honor that name. So that's why I can just go and say import module. So just notice that I have to just escape the backslash. So now we're getting into these escape weird scenarios. So this is one of those. So we need to just go and escape the backslash. And then for PowerShell, the way that it's going to work is there is an object, again, the system script creates an object and shares that with your the user script. So basically, we just dot source the user deployment script, so we can access those variables. And then we can just go and initialize, just basically clean up the object just in case. Then I can, because I already imported my module, so now I can just go and invoke my module, and I pass some parameters, right? Some arguments. In this case, I'm just passing the same foo and bar. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, so now you deployment script output, I want now to write something into my output. So this is the way that you can write an output from a deployment script. So you just go and say, this is a hash table. This is just an object. So you can go and add what the key is, and you can add the value. The value can be basically needs to be an object, right? So that's the only requirement. So the value cannot be an array. It needs to be an object. But of course, the object can have a value of a type array, right? So that's the only one of the considerations. So I think I'm just jumping ahead, but I think it's worth mentioning that every single output needs to be an object. If you don't pass an object, we're going to try to parse the information. The parsing is going to fail, and the exception is going to tell you, look, your output is not a well-formatted JSON object. So we try our best to just go and put some error information that is going to lead the user or the customer towards what the issue is, so they can find a solution. In this case, I was saying that I need my module, right? So now my module is a different file, different than my script, right? So the one that is going to be in my entry point. So now if I want to access this file, then deployment scripts exposes something called supporting script URIs, which is an array of files, right? So here you can just go and put any file that you want deployment scripts to download. Again, so these files are getting downloaded inside the ACI instance. They don't get downloaded in Azure, right? So again, the system script is the one in charge of just reading this information, and is going to be in charge of just looping through every single item in the array, and is going to start downloading the information. So, which means by the time that this script is going to run, of course, we need to run the download first and then run the script. When we run the script, then the script already contains this file, and then you can just go, or your script is going to work as expected. So if I show you really quick, what are the steps? So the steps are mostly the same, right? So I'm just importing the module. I'm just setting the my result to whatever function I'm invoking. And then what I'm doing is I'm just accessing, for example, in this case, I'm just accessing one of the keys from my object, my result. In my deployment script case, I don't want to access just a value. I want to just go and push this my result object as a deployment script output. And that's what I'm doing right here. So just to print that output, you can go and use, of course, in the output section, you can use a reference function to your resource, in this case, the resource name. And then don't forget to add .outputs, and then you can give the output name, right? So in this case is script output, then that's the script output name that I'm going to use. So if I have a different name, of course, it's going to be a different name, but this .outputs is something that doesn't change, right? So that's something that should exist always. So if we look into PowerShell with outputs, so now if I click in the outputs, now I can see my result, which is, again, let's go and put that maybe right here so we can see. So that's my output right here, my result. And here's my output, my result, which is an object, right? So now that's the object that we are showing, right? So just having this printed as an output is okay. You can access the deployment outputs from a different maybe template. But usually you have maybe another resource inside your template that is going to reference the deployment script output. Right, so one of the examples is, let's say, Key Vault, and you create a Key Vault first, then you run deployment scripts to create a certificate, and then you run another step, let's say, to create a VM, and then you can use that certificate as the login information. Right, so that's what you can use. Right, so in this case, I'm just doing this output. It works just for visualization purposes, or if you want to access the deployment outputs, but usually is everything inside the same template. So that's for this one. So again, let's go and take a look at the overview. So let's go and take a look at the inputs. Something, if you notice, I'm passing the UTC value that I'm going to be explaining why that is. And then if we look at the template, again, just one more time, so I'm not lying to you guys. So I have my script content that is now having a reference to my deployment script output, and this is the one with my outputs, and that's what I was able to get right here. So that's for PowerShell with outputs. Now let's go and get into another example that I didn't include in the presentation, but I think is something that you guys should be aware of, is escaping, right? So deployment scripts is written in C#, right? So what it means is we need to double escape any escape characters, right? So we need to basically double escape the characters. So the reason is because we pass, so when we read the template, the first escaping is going to be from the template to deployment script service. The second escaping is going to be from the deployment script service into ACI, right? So if you guys know ACI, the way that ACI works is ACI receives a command as an array of strings. So that array of strings needs to be, so every single space is going to be basically be is going to be the delimiter to say this is a next item, right? So if I pass this argument to ACI, what ACI is going to receive is this 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So it's going to receive 4 arguments as part of the command. Right, so that's why we need to double escape. So the first escaping is from the template into deployment script service, and the second escape is from the deployment script service into ACI. So that's how we can go and preserve the escaping of any character. So if I do this, then if I show you, not this one, but if I show you this one right here, so now this is what I'm passing, right? So now I'm executing this, and I'm passing foo with my double quotes and bar with my double quotes, right? So now that's what we're passing. Here's the information about what is the storage account that has been created, what is the container instance that has been created. So if we look really quick into the container instance, we can go and look into these containers. We look into the properties, and here is what I was mentioning to you guys. If I just increase this a little bit, so is just an array. The command is an array of strings, right? So every single item is going to be an array of a string. Okay, so here's the, as you can see, so now this is the double escape. Okay, perfect. So if at any time, I don't know if you guys have any question, just feel free to interrupt me.
We do have some questions, Jorge.
Okay.
Let me grab you before we get too far here. So we've got, this was asked, I think it was around the first demo or maybe before. Is it possible to create an AAD app and set application delegate scope for any resource using ARM template?
That's a good question. I have to take a look because I need to look into what the managed identities can do. So I don't know if that can fall into that category. Maybe yes, maybe no. So I can get back to you on that one.
Cool. Another one was just what about desired state configuration? I'm not quite sure what context I was asked in. Let's see.
So for DSC?
Yeah, desired state configuration, because that's, I know Kubernetes does just desired state configuration, but
so
about
I assume maybe in the VM. So if it's in the VM, so DSCs, so those can be as just as an extension of a VM. I don't know if maybe the question was related to just when I was mentioning about some of the clever ways to run scripts inside Azure. One can be to just have a custom extension on a VM. So maybe a desired state configuration is another clever way. So I'm not sure about the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So we're also capturing these in the Slack channel, so we can definitely make sure that we can revisit answers afterwards.
Yep.
There were a couple other questions around. It was when you were going through that second PowerShell, the one with the output demo, about whether or not you could download an app package and copy a web. Was it? Can I use this feature to download app package and copy a web app or function app?
Yep. Whatever you can do to just go and download is up to you, right? So you can go and download a zip file. You can go if there are no tools available inside the container, you can go and install those tools. For PowerShell, you can install any modules. For Bash, you can go and do an apt get and then start getting some of the packages that you need. So yeah, so it's up to you. There are no limitations on that front.
Cool. And then there was a kind of a follow-up. Will this be available as part of a commercial marketplace publishing application solution template?
So for publishing a solution template, so I think that might be more in line to template specs, because this is just another resource. Template specs is a consolidation of resources that I can show later, and that might be more in line to this question.
Okay, cool. And there was so if Ricardo is still here, he's the one that had the question or brought up the desired state. You could come off mute if you want to ask your questions a little more with context.
Hi, Jorge. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
Yes, doing great, doing great. The question was when you were explaining on the ARM template, maybe I got it confused. The desired state configuration, it only applies to the VMs or the whole declaration of the resources that you are or we are stating in the to create. That's what my question was aiming for.
So if I understand your question, so well, DSC is a PowerShell stuff, as far as I know, for VMs, right? So you just to go and run, you create a VM, then you run the desired state configuration, which is basically as part of the VM creation is going to run those set of scripts.
Okay, I got it mixed up with since you're declaring, we are declaring on the ARM template the way that you want it, the way that you want the resources. Then I got it mixed up. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yep. So
thanks.
No problem. So yes, so you can see deployment scripts as another alternative for DSC, right? So now you can go and access your VM, and then you can go and and install any package that you want. So you can do basically a bunch of stuff. So it's up to you. Um, Maybe DSC is better for other approaches. So I think at the end is more for you guys to go and see what tool is best, right? So this is another approach for you to configure your control and data plane operations. Cool. Okay. Any other question, Jason?
I think that's it for right now.
Cool. Okay. So now let me go into the next set of examples, which are going to be now Bash specific, right? So for Bash, just a few considerations, right? So I don't want to just go and show stuff that can be simple for you guys to get, but some of the considerations and what are the differences between the PowerShell version and the CLI version, or the Bash version in this case. So in PowerShell, to throw an exception, you do throw. In Bash, you have to do a redirect, right? So let's go and take a look really quick into how that looks like. And again, all these different templates are going to be available in my GitHub account, and I'm going to be sharing that at the end, which I think I didn't include, but so anyway, so here's here's my script. Again, another simple script. If you know Bash, this is the way that I can go and like lazy execute a specific function or an expression in this case. And then I can go and check my result. I can echo my result, and then I can check if this is not 0 in Bash. Everything that is different than 0 is an exception. Then I can go and say echo and then redirect. This is a standard output into my standard error, right? So again, Bash specific, 0 is a standard input, 1 is a standard output, and 2 is a standard error. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying whatever I just capture from this response, just print that into my error, in my error stream. And this is important, exit 1, right? So again, because we are in Bash, just doing or throwing an exception means doing an exit with a non-zero code. So that's what you need to do. So exit 1. So what that means is I can do an exit 1 without doing this echo. What that is going to instruct the system or the Bootstrap script is that there was an exception, but there is no message. So that's why it's really important for you, if you are handling Bash scripts inside a deployment script, to go and do a standard or just a redirect on the message, and then doing the exit 1 as well, right? So these two needs to be hand by hand. Otherwise, you can you maybe scratch your head saying, yeah, this script is failing, but doesn't give me any information. And you might be blaming deployment scripts. Yeah, that's how Bash works, right? So for those of you really well versed in Bash, this is something that you might already know. Some of you, like myself, I wasn't that well versed in Bash. It took me some time to realize this information. So, and of course, what I did was just an AZ keyboard unknown. There is no unknown key, so that's why this is going to throw an exception. And then the last one is CLI running Python, right? So remember that I mentioned that we have supporting a script. You can also include a primary script, right? So if you don't want to have a script content, right, because maybe your script content is really long, it doesn't make sense to just go and copy that and then paste that in your template, because it's going to be confusing. And if you want to go and test your main script, there is no easy way to do that. So that's why we expose another property, which is called primary script URI. So the primary script URI is, again, another location that is going to point to a file, right? So if I'm in a Bash, if I'm in CLI, it should be an .sh. Or it can be actually without any extension. It depends on how you author your script. This is not a bash session, but just wanted to mention that. And again, supporting scripts, right? So now I can have my main.py, I can have my requirements.txt, and then I can just go and have another class that my Python script can call, right? So now, as you can see, so now the options are multiple. So now whatever you were used to do inside your local computer to just go and maybe finalize the configuration of an AKS cluster just by importing a bunch of packages and running a bunch of bash scripts or maybe a bunch of Python scripts. So now you can just push them into supporting script URIs, have the engine to download all the files, and then you can have your primary script that is going to be the entry point to just trigger the execution of your scripts, right? So now this is another way that you can just go and execute your scripts. So, and again, I have in this case my Python script actually outputs some stuff. So now I can access the output as well, right? So the way that this is going to work is my main or my primary script is going to read the output from my Python script, and that's the one that is going to output the information, right? So that's how it works, right? So there's always an entry point, is your script content or your primary script URI, and then any supporting scripts. So to write to outputs in Bash is a little bit different than PowerShell. And again, in the documentation side, everything is included, so feel free to just take a look. But as I mentioned before, sometimes it's really boring to just go and look into the documentation, especially if you have tons of documentation. So here I'm just showing you what is the syntax to write an output in a Bash script. So this is what you need to do. You just need to redirect any echo, so like any stream, into an AZ scripts output path, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to create a file that we already expose as an environment variable. So we know the information of this. And then basically this is going to say all this information right here, just put that inside this file, right? So that's how it works. So why Bash and PowerShell, they are different? Because PowerShell has a notion on just sharing the environment variables, right? So you can share them and then you can read information. In Bash, it's a little bit tricky because yes, you can share a state, you can .source information, but the problem is how you can go. Basically, Bash is not a strongly typed. I think that's the easiest answer, right? So Bash is not a strongly typed, whereas PowerShell is a strongly typed. So now in Bash, you don't know if an output can be a string value. You don't know if the output can be a JSON object. You don't know if the output can be an array. It's really difficult to create that type of objects. In PowerShell, no, right? So in PowerShell, it's really simple. So that's why in PowerShell, we share a specific variable. In Bash, you need to write the outputs, right? So that's the only way that we said, like, there are so many ways that someone can write an output and so many checks that we need to do. So we said, okay, let's go and have the end user to write the outputs in the way that they want. And for Bash people, JQ is a way to just go and construct a JSON object or a JSON string in Bash, right? So, and the container for CLI already contains JQ. Right, so this is the way that you can go and output this. So I have an example right here. So if we go into my CLI, if I check my outputs, so there you go. So now we have a well-formatted JSON object that contains the information from my keyboard CLI command. All right, so that's how you can go and get the information. All right, so again, just so you guys know that I'm not lying to you, here's the same template, right? So here's the template where my script content is this. So this can be a file, yes, can be a file. But this is the script content with the same redirect to a file in this case, right? So, and then here's my output, which is just an object. I can do an output of a specific array index and a specific value if I want to, right? So that's another option as well. Okay, so let's continue. Are there any questions on this, on the bash part? It's really similar to PowerShell, so just a few considerations.
Yeah, it looks like we're good right now.
Okay. So let's look at some considerations. And I already mentioned a few of them, so it should be already a little bit familiar with you. So Bootstrap script, right? So PowerShell and Bash, right? So we created a set of PowerShell, one PowerShell script and one Bash script that is going to orchestrate the deployment script. So it's going to download, the files. It's going to execute the files. So this is important, right? So there are some properties that I've been just showing you, but there are properties that you have to consider. So cleanup preference. So this is really important. The reason is because we have 3 cleanup preferences. We have on success, on expiration, and always. So what cleanup preference means is, let's say in the happy path, right? So your script got executed, you got the outputs, then we don't want you to have just like resources sitting around. What we do is we go and we delete the supporting resources. So we go into ACI, we kill ACI, we go into the storage account, we remove the storage account. So, but to do that, there are different flags, right? So on success basically means if your script succeeded, we delete the supporting resources. If your script didn't succeed, then we won't be deleting any of the supporting resources, and instead the Bootstrap script is going to keep your container alive for 1 hour. So the reason is you can now log into your ACI instance, and then you can debug the information, right? So that's why we have this just keeping alive, right? So if you know a little bit about ACI, when you execute, it's like something like a fire and forget, right? So you fire something and then finishes and then shuts down. So if it shuts down, then you won't be able to log in, you won't be able to get into any debugging information. So that's why if the script fails, we keep the container alive for 1 hour. So with on success, as I said, so if it fails, then we just keep the container alive. On expiration, we always keep the supporting resources alive. And then it's up to your timeout and your retention period to just go and say how long those resources are going to still be sitting around in your subscription, right? So basically on expiration, it creates like a background job that you tell in the deployment script how long you want those resources to exist, and then once that expiration comes, then we clean up the resources. And always, so basically, if your script failed, if your script succeeded, we basically don't care. We just clean up. We clean up the resources. So escaping, right? So I show you how ACI passes an array of strings. So we need to do a double escaping because, as I mentioned, we go from C# from the ARM template into C#, from C# into ACI, right? So C# is deployment script service. So we follow this escaping model. So we didn't like go and create our own escaping model. So we just use a system call to just go and follow some standard. So that's the standard. You can go and take a look. And I usually use this tool to just double escape my arguments. So the timeout, as I mentioned, so timeout is going to say how long your script is going to run. Force update tag. So now you have to know that Azure receives millions of requests, millions of requests. If we are going to just go and analyze every single script and start just triggering jobs, so at some point is one of the jobs is going to say, you know what, I have to do nothing because this script is identical to the one that you already deployed, then we're just wasting resources. So to do that, what we do is we go and do some pre-flight checks. So we analyze the content of your deployment script, right? So the script content, and we check against our database, and we say, like, is this the same, right? So if it's the same and is using the same resource name, then most likely this is the same script, and we're going to do something that we call no operation or no op. Right? So we're going to say, you know what? I'm sorry, this looks the same to me. I'm not going to be wasting resources. But what happens if you are not passing a script content and you're passing a URI to a supporting script? Then at that point, we're going to say the file names are the same. I won't bother going into your URI and analyze your stuff to find any differences, because that means that I need to store the previous version. So we won't be getting into that business. So that's why you use the force update tag. So force update tag, if you look into the templates, as I said, so those are going to be shared. We use the UTC now function. So basically, it's just going to get a new value every time that you run a new deployment script. So what that means is get into the habit of using the force update tag, because if for some reason you just change from a script content into just a file, then the next time that you run, you are going to be guaranteed that your script is going to always run again. Versus if you don't put the force update tag and you use the same file name, then we are going to say, this looks the same to me, I won't be running this script. And then you're going to, again, be scratching your head saying, how come I updated my script, I fixed my stuff, and deployment scripts is still failing, right? So that's because we're going to say, you already deployed something that failed. I don't know if you fixed your file, so I'm going to just do nothing. So that's why you use the force update tag. And then the job timeout, right? So as I mentioned, so the way that Azure works is everything are jobs, a bunch of asynchronous calls, so nothing like you're going to just be waiting, right? So when you run an ARM template, it's not that you're sitting there just waiting for the response. So it's basically going to respond at 201 saying accepted, and then wait or just do some polling to just get the information of the operation. But of course, we're not going to be running a deployment script forever, right? So we have a timeout, right? So it's roughly 1 hour. So what that means is you might want to be inclined to say, now that I have deployment scripts, let's go and create a full environment with one single template, because that's what I did in the past. My answer would be no, because we are not going to be running forever your deployment script, right? So as I said before, so I should receive millions of requests. We don't have, we won't be able to be or give you the luxury to just go and run something forever. We're going to just be timing out a specific time. So that's why if you say, yeah, so now that we have deployment scripts, so now all my scripts that provision my AKS cluster and provision my application gateway and everything, I'm going to just move into deployment scripts. So just think that a couple of times before doing that, and then only move whatever is necessary into deployment scripts and not move like everything as a lift and shift type of approach. So to meet compliance regulations, so I mentioned, and you guys saw, the deployment script is going to create some cryptic names for the resources, for the supporting resources. So what that means is if you have a policy with enforcing a specific naming convention, deployment script is going to say, I'm trying to create something and you policy, you're blocking me. So for that specific situation, we offer the way to just use an existing storage and use a custom ACI name. So to use an existing storage account, then you just go and create the storage account. You just need to make sure that supports file shares. There is a combination of SKUs that you can use to just create file shares. And then all what we need is we need just access to the file share, so we can go and create file shares and delete file shares. So when we do the, let's say again, the cleanup process, right? So the cleanup preference, let's say that you set always, and then you're using an existing storage account. We are not going to delete the storage account, right? So that would be really bad, and it's going to look really bad on us, and that might cost my job. So what we do is we just go and delete the file share. That's it. So whatever we created, that's what we delete, right? So if we created the file share, that's what we delete. If you have a storage account for some other stuff, just rest assured that all the other stuff is going to remain the same. All what we're going to do is we're going to create a file share and we're going to delete the file share, right? So if for some reason you get into a deletion of a storage account, just pick up the phone, call me right away, because that is going to be really bad. Hopefully we just run a bunch of tests. We have a bunch of monitoring and everything that we just account for this not to happen. For using a custom ACI name, that's tricky in the sense when you use, let's say, two deployment scripts, one for Bash and one for PowerShell, and you use the same ACI name and you go to the same resource group, right? So if you remember, as I mentioned, deployment scripts create supporting resources. So deployment script is going to create an ACI with a name equals to foo, and it's going to create that in the resource group bar. So that's for deployment script 1. If deployment script 2 deploys to resource group bar using foo as the ACI name, then deployment script is going to say, I'm trying to create an ACI that is already in use by another deployment script. So we are detecting that race condition, and we're going to say, we're going to block the second deployment script. Whoever gets second, right? So maybe it can be the second deployment script, or can be the first. So it depends. So the one that got scheduled first is the one that runs, and the second one is going to just get denied, right? So that's super important for you guys to be aware of that. That we are running a bunch of checks to go and say if ACI is being used, then we're going to prevent the execution. You might be lucky if the two if you run one deployment script and that finalizes just right before the second one, then it might seem like both went through. But if there is a race condition, we're going to capture that race condition. So what is the work in progress? So I didn't talk about service endpoints, right? So service endpoints are really important for compliance regulations. So service endpoint is in the works, right? So it's in the works, and it doesn't depend entirely on deployment scripts. We use a storage account, which already supports service endpoint, and we use ACI with managed identity, that they are working on fully supporting service endpoints. So when that happens, then we're going to just turn on the switch, and deployment script is going to be fully integrated with service endpoint as well. Token forwarding, or on behalf of, that's another important feature. So today, if you have a deployment script with a managed identity, is the managed identity that you specify in your script the one that needs to have access or permissions to create the storage account and ACI, when in theory it should be the logged in user. So we are working on having that token forwarding, which means whoever logged in that's the authorization and the token that we're going to use to create the supporting resources, and not the managed identity from the deployment script. So those are in the works. So hopefully in 2-3 months, we're going to have an update, and maybe this can get fully released and supported. So I have a few more minutes, and I'm going to just be talking about template specs. Just and the demo is just show how that gets created. But let's go and finalize with this approach. So monolithic versus modularized templates. So if we look at the AKS example, I can go and create one single ARM template, a big ARM template that configures my environment end to end. That's acceptable? It depends. I think from the maintenance perspective, it becomes a maintenance hell, and we don't want to get into that. So usually you go and break those down into multiple templates, and that's when link templates come into the picture. But link templates have some challenges, right? So you need to stage, you need to push those files in a public location. And the reason is because Azure needs to access those files, right? So those files should reside somewhere, somewhere in the public, maybe protected with some password, or protected with, if it's a storage account, with some keys, but protected, right? And public. And then you need to synchronize with maybe your source code management, right? So if you make an update to your template, you better want that to get replicated. And if you're using a storage account and you want like geo access, multi-geo access, then you might start thinking about putting a CDN. But now you're just adding a bunch of stuff, right? So why it needs to be really hard for customers to just go and share a template? So now we show template specs. So now you can share and modularize your template using template specs. So I put the icon of blueprints for those that are familiar with that, because it's the evolution of a blueprint definition, not a blueprint assignment, but a blueprint definition. So it's a new way to stage your templates. The nice thing is it's a first-class Azure resource, which means you can apply Azure policy, you can apply RBAC, right? So it's another resource. You can just do whatever you want to just manage access to your resources. And they are going to reside in a resource group, because they are what we call tracked resources. So Azure is aware of that resource. And it's going to replace the Azure Blueprint definition when we go into public preview and maybe into GA. So for now, we just use a CLI, but soon it's going to be PowerShell and the Azure CLI that are going to be supporting the creation of template spec. So before I go into this demo, Jason, are there any questions on this part?
Not at the moment.
Cool.
Yeah, anybody with questions, please add them to the Q&A.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's go and take a look at the demo of template specs, and that's almost towards the end. So in template specs, so we have is in private preview, which is right here on this screen. So there is a CLI, as I said. So you can go and say new AZ template spec. You provide what the resource group name is, what the name of the resource is going to be, version, which is super important, location, and which one is your file. So I use some of my Azure CLI deployment scripts template, and that's what I uploaded. So now if we take a look right here, so let's go first into my resource group. And if you can see right here, that's my template spec. So if I go into my template spec, what I'm going to see is, so this is the latest version, when it got created, what is my name, the name of this, and then the template. And from here, I can go and choose deploy if I want to, or I can just go and say, you know what, I'm going to just restrict access or give access to a specific resource group. I can apply policies, right? So I can do whatever I want with an Azure, or whatever I can do with an Azure resource. So it's the same. So now this becomes an Azure resource. What means is, if you have access to this subscription and to this resource group, then you can go and deploy this template spec into any other subscription. So now what that means is you can have one repo in your resource group in subscription foo to say this resource group is for all my networking templates. So now my networking team is the only one that can maintain those templates, and they have access to that resource group. And then you can go and say, now networking team, you're going to have access to all these different subscriptions. So you can go and stand up new networking infrastructure, and then just go and use your template spec resource to just go and stand up a new maybe a new, I don't know, VNets or subnets or whatever you need. So the this is the repo. So I'm going to share. This is the this is not a link. The link is over here that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. So this is private preview. So if you want to sign up, you have to go and fill out a form. It's a simple few questions that you can fill, and then you're going to get access to this repo. So you can go and check how to do the quick start, how to deploy the template spec, how to create a template spec, right? So here's the creation of the template spec. This is how you can deploy a template spec, right? So you can go and get the ID of the template spec, and then you just do like any normal resource group deployment. The only difference is, instead of passing a template file or a template object, now you pass a template spec ID, and the content is going to be basically the resource ID of your template spec, right? So
Unknown participant is now exiting.
oh, okay. So that's how you can go and deploy now a template spec across multiple subscriptions, right? So now no longer staging stuff into a storage account or in GitHub or any other place. Now everything becomes Azure Construct and Azure Native for you to go and use. And I think that finalizes the session, and then I think we already covered the Q&A, but I don't know if there are any additional questions. And here are the references that I'm going to be sharing again. But I don't know, there are any questions?
Yeah, there's one more question. Basically, just wanted to verify that the blueprints are more or less going to be called template specs when everything gets solid.
Yeah. Blueprint as a service is going to remain. What is going to change is the inner. So the shell of blueprint definition remains the same, but how you can author on blueprint definition is going to be a template spec, right? So blueprint service is not going to get retired. It's going to now ingest template spec to just create a definition. And when that happens, we can go and say template spec is GA, and then deploy blueprints is GA as well. And we're going to be offering some translation mechanisms that if you already invested in creating blueprints or blueprint definitions, we're going to offer some way to translate those into template specs. Any other question?
That's it in the chat at the moment. If anybody wants to come off mute and ask, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I guess we can wrap up.
Sounds good. And I think I'm going to be sharing this presentation with you, Jason, so you can just publish so cool. Everyone can access. So here's the sign up for template specs. Here are the documentation, the template spec repo. You're going to get access when you sign up. That's my email. If there are any issues, feel free to reach out. And I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cool. Well, thank you, man. Been a pleasure to just talk again in what was my home meetup. Yeah, I was born in the Boston meetup, so it's good. Good to be
Yeah,
back.
no, great to have you back and presenting it. It's great. I know a lot of people disappear into the Microsoft machinery, and they never present at meetups again. So it's great to see that you haven't been chewed up by the machine.
No, so yeah, so there are maybe in a future event I can talk about what if, which is the how to it's the estate is similar to the estate machine from Terraform, but being an Azure construct. So it is going to show you the deployment plan and what it's going to do. It's going to create or update resources, delete resources depending on what you're doing. It's pretty cool. That's for what if. And then maybe later we can do a more deep dive on template specs. Right now it's just private preview.
All right, awesome, man.
Cool. Okay, well, there are no other questions. So here's 4:30. I have to go to the next meeting in 10 minutes. So if there are any questions, here's my email. Just feel free to reach out.
Sweet, awesome.
Cool.
And yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks for all the good questions tonight, everybody. It was a pretty interactive group tonight. And it sounds like a lot of you guys are really into this infrastructure as code stuff, so it's good. Oh, and anyone has topics that they want to hear in the future, please feel free to either reach out to me via email, jason@jasonhaley.com, or Veronica, Bill, or I on Twitter. We're easily to catch there, or you can just mention on any of the meetup groups, into the comments there. But we're always interested in what people want to hear these days, because Azure is such a big topic. There's so many areas and corners to cover. You know, we don't want to necessarily put together a talk that is just interesting to us. We'd like to have a more educational or learning platform for attendees to come and actually learn something and provide some good content. And plus, with the YouTube channel, you know, if you don't get to make it to a talk, you can actually go catch it later. Or if you find it really useful, you can go back and watch it again, or parts of it that you found useful. So I'll just go ahead and wrap up here real quick. We've got Michael Crump on deck to present August 11th. It's on a Tuesday. Same time, 6 p.m. Eastern, and he's going to be doing Azure tips and tricks. You may have seen his blog, where he does. He was doing several a week, but I don't even know what number he's up to these days. But he's really focused on little tips that are easy to digest, but are very much useful for improving your productivity with Azure, and also just learning the platform more. So please join us August 11th, and I'll just wrap it up here. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you guys for attending. See you.